Last month, I resigned from my permanent academic lectureship during a shockingly competitive job market, and I feel really good about it. If you're thinking of quitting your job, it can be a scary time, especially if it's your first real job, or if there's substantial sunk cost, like 8 years of university, or if you move to a different country. But there are some things worth taking a risk for. In this video, I'll share some telltale signs it might be time for you to evaluate your career plan and make some changes. Toward the end of the video, I'll share the strategies I put in place to make sure I could resign successfully. The first sign it might be time to reevaluate your career is a feeling of pointlessness about your work. And I don't just mean because you're not a brain surgeon or you haven't won an Oscar. I mean at a much more micro scale than that. For example, the actual things I needed to be successful as an academic, like publishing papers and winning grant money, felt utterly pointless. There were times where I spoke to colleagues who'd had papers rejected and they were upset about it, and I just couldn't relate. Because I didn't care. And I found myself almost being judgmental about people who took their jobs in academia seriously because I couldn't see why it mattered to them or why it once mattered to me, which is a bad place to be in. I quickly learned that this feeling of meaninglessness is a symptom of burnout, and it's often ignored. It can be caused by a misalignment between your values and your job, which is where I was last year. And treating burnout isn't just about taking holiday or a few days off. It's about making some real changes in your lifestyle, which is one of the things that led me to realize I need to leave. Objectively, I know research and teaching aren't pointless, but on the day-to-day, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were more important things I could personally contribute to the world. The second sign it's time for you to realign is if you find yourself justifying your unhappiness. This is also called the comparison mantra. I don't hear many people talk about this, but it's that feeling that you don't deserve to be unhappy because other people have it worse. I kept telling myself that I had a good, steady job, which is rare enough within academia, let alone outside the industry. But I was so disappointed in myself for not being happier. And eventually what helped me decide to leave was recognizing that even though things could be worse, they could also be better. Remember that allowing yourself to be miserable doesn't make anyone else's life any better. And in case you haven't heard this lately, you deserve to be really, really happy. Was that cheesy? The third sign you need to reevaluate your career is if you're experiencing something called negative spillover or toxic impact. I relate to this one so much because somehow over the last 3 or 4 years, complaining became my personality. I had a short temper and random bouts of anxiety. I remember once literally yelling at my friend at a bar for making a minor joke at my expense. Don't get me wrong, self-deprecating jokes are my specialty. But for whatever reason, I hulked out because she made completely accurate observation about who I am. I also always hated talking about my work, again, because it felt so pointless, but also because it just made me angry. And this was a big turning point for me. A few months ago, I was on the couch with my partner and we were both on our computers working away when I started saying something about work. And he looked up from his computer and with the saddest look on his eyes said, "Enough. Please, just enough." And I knew exactly what he meant. I'd been complaining for days about the same thing. We of course talked about it in detail later, and I explained that I was miserable. This made me realize that being unhappy at work was making me unhappy in other areas of my life. And it was also just making me a less interesting person. And I really hated that. The final sign it might be time to look at your career options is if it feels like you're running someone else's race. I think if you're feeling this way, you'll know what I mean. When I finished my PhD, I already had a postdoc, and shortly after secured a permanent lectureship, both at great universities. I was making about £45,000 a year, or 77,000 Canadian, or 61,000 American, and I was barely 27 years old. I could have climbed the hierarchy, getting salary increases every year, and slowly making my way up the academic hierarchy. But the best parts of my day were the 1 hour I spent at the gym and my 1 hour walk where I listened to a podcast. It was getting harder and harder to get out of bed and go to work every morning because I was dreading it. I kept telling myself I was doing really well, I'm a good academic, and the work itself was not that challenging for me. Sure, it wasn't really easy, but I knew it would get easier as I progressed. There was a moment where I realized that I wasn't just running someone else's race, I was winning someone else's race. I was working hard for a lifestyle I didn't even want. But quitting your job is a big deal, and I want to be clear about what I did before I ever let on to anyone that I was even thinking about leaving. The most important thing to do before you quit your job is to minimize risk. And here are 3 ways you can do this. The first is by getting your finances in order. Few of us can afford to live without a job, so I ensured I had a job lined up before I quit. If you're not going to do this, the recommendation is to have 6 to 12 months salary saved. But honestly, it's true that it's easier to get another job when you already have a job. Take a serious look at your finances and how long you can realistically afford to be unemployed or underemployed if you're taking the route where you are quitting your job before you have another one. The second thing you should do is make sure you're leaving for the right reasons. Manage risk by making sure the reason you're quitting is actually related to your job. What I mean by this is ask yourself the question, is your current problem really your work? Or is there something else that you're running from, like a bad relationship, loneliness, or something else? If you're quitting, it's best that you're running towards something else, like a different type of job or new skills or a new role, not running from something. Maybe you need to see a therapist or make plans to socialize with friends more regularly, because we have just been through and are still going through a universally traumatic event. So it's important you do a lot of thinking before you really make any big decisions. The third and final thing to do before you quit your job is to let people in your social circle know what you're doing. Do not up and quit your job without telling the people you trust, because there might be something that you're missing. I recommend you tell some friends outside of your industry. I told friends who are not aware of what academics do at all, I was really surprised by their response. I remember specifically telling 3 friends that I've known for about 15 years, and one of them said, "Good for you, Cheryl. I think it'll help you get your light back." And that absolutely crushed me. But it also helped me see very clearly that it was the right decision. I, of course, had further in-depth conversations with my partner and my parents, discussing things like, what if I take this new role and I don't like it? Can we afford to be unemployed for a few months? How much of my personality depends on my identity as an academic? What if I'm unhappier in the next job? Having these spaces where I could talk to people who knew nothing about academic work was really helpful. So although social networks might not seem like an obvious way to manage risk, they can really help clarify any of the things you might be worried about. My reasons for leaving my job have nothing to do with anyone but me. I was treated incredibly well, but I couldn't shake this feeling that I should do something else. And when I looked at the goals I have for my life and how I want it to look, they are not aligned with the academic lifestyles or with the skills that I was developing every single day. I was simply building a life I didn't want. If you're feeling a bit lost in life, but not sure if quitting your job is the right thing for you to do, then I also have a video on following your passions in life and why it's okay if you don't know what your passion is. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so we can figure it all out somewhat together. Thanks.